A cow made of butter sounds ridiculous from across the Atlantic. But what happens when the joke suddenly becomes a tradition you can touch, photograph, and somehow understand? At an American state fair, the strangest things are often the ones that reveal the most. Maybe the real question is not why Americans built a butter cow, but why so many outsiders only understood its charm after standing right in front of it. America-made butter, famous, a life-size cow, made from butter, sounds like something somebody would invent after losing a bet at the county fair. Yet in America, people actually line up to see it with the same curiosity normally reserved for a new roller coaster or a championship trophy. That is exactly why the butter cow works so well. It takes something as ordinary as butter, something most people expect to meet on toast before breakfast, and turns it into a piece of local culture big enough to stop a crowd in its tracks.
You see all that made on a butter, Benny?
Made out of butter?
Yeah, like a lot of butter, isn't it?
From a European perspective, the first reaction is easy to understand. France has agricultural exhibitions where real cattle are carefully groomed and judged. Britain has county shows built around livestock, produce, horses, machinery, and generations of rural tradition. Germany has regional harvest festivals where food and farming are celebrated with their own long-established customs. Those events are lively and proud, but the American State Fair has a very particular talent for taking agriculture and giving it the personality of a Saturday night spectacle. That difference becomes obvious the moment the butter cow enters the picture. At the Iowa State Fair, the famous butter cow tradition dates back to 1911. The sculpture is made over a reusable internal framework and covered with hundreds of pounds of butter, shaped patiently until an everyday dairy product suddenly has shoulders, legs, facial features, and the calm expression of an animal that appears completely unaware. It is technically spreadable. There is something wonderfully American about that level of commitment. Someone looked at butter and decided a refrigerator-sized tub simply lacked ambition. The appeal goes much deeper than novelty, though, and that is where outsiders often change their minds after seeing American fair culture up close. In many European cities, agricultural life can feel physically distant from the urban center. Someone living in central Paris, Amsterdam, or Berlin may buy excellent cheese, milk, and meat every week without spending much time thinking about the farms behind them. A state fair brings that entire world into one place and refuses to make it quiet. Farmers, families, livestock, tractors, competitions, fried food, crafts, and local traditions all share the same grounds. The butter cow becomes the perfect symbol of that attitude because it refuses to behave like a museum object. It is playful without treating agriculture as a joke. It is technically impressive without acting precious about itself. Americans can admire the craftsmanship, take a family photo, argue about whether it looks more majestic than last year's version, then walk 20 yards and order something deep fried on a stick. That combination can be surprisingly charming to visitors who arrive expecting American culture to be little more than the loudest headlines they have seen from overseas. News coverage usually focuses on conflict, politics, crime, or whatever story can survive 24 hours of television panels. Nobody builds an international news segment around a grandmother bringing her grandchildren to see a butter sculpture at the state fair. Yet those ordinary scenes are often where the country feels most human. The butter cow is ridiculous in exactly the right way. It serves no grand practical purpose, and that is part of the beauty. Communities need traditions that exist simply because people enjoy returning to them. Europe has plenty of its own wonderfully unnecessary customs, from Britain's cheese-rolling races to Spain's enormous festival sculptures. America simply answers with a cow made of butter and keeps a perfectly straight face. Once you see that in person, mocking it becomes surprisingly difficult. Cheese curds take over some fair foods, announce themselves with size, smoke, or enough frosting to qualify as interior decoration. Fried cheese curds do something much sneakier. They look almost too simple to be memorable. And then 5 minutes later, the paper tray is empty and everyone is wondering who ate the last one. That is exactly why they deserve their own place in American fair culture. Wisconsin is the obvious home base for the obsession. The state produced more than 5 billion pounds of cheese in 2023, according to USDA data, accounting for roughly a quarter of total US cheese production. So when fried cheese curds show up at a Wisconsin state fair, they are not just another carnival snack dropped from nowhere. They are a local agricultural product transformed into something built specifically for crowds, paper trays, cold drinks, and the dangerous sentence, "We'll just get one order to share." The appeal begins with texture. Fresh cheese curds already have that famous squeak against the teeth because of their protein structure, especially when they are very fresh. Fry them in batter, and the contrast becomes almost unfair. Crisp shell outside, warm elastic cheese inside, with enough salt and richness to keep the hand moving back toward the tray before the brain has officially approved another piece. It is the snack equivalent of opening a bag of chips during a road trip and suddenly realizing the bag has somehow become a historical document. That texture also makes them feel very different from many familiar cheese snacks in Europe. In France, cheese is often given room to be itself, served on a board, paired with bread, wine, fruit, or charcuterie. In the Netherlands, cubes of Gouda may appear as casual bites, while in places like Prague or Bratislava, fried cheese exists as a plated meal with breading, sauce, and sides. American fare curds take another route entirely. They turn cheese into something social, mobile, and slightly chaotic. There is no ceremony around them, and that is part of the charm. Nobody needs to explain the milk source for 15 minutes before the first bite. Nobody's waiting for the right wine pairing. The tray lands in the middle of a group, toothpicks or fingers immediately go to work, and suddenly strangers are negotiating the final curd with the seriousness of a Senate committee. That relaxed style says something bigger about American state fair food. The fair takes regional pride and removes the stiffness. Agriculture is still there, but it is allowed to have fun. A product that supports dairy farms and represents a major state industry can also arrive in a paper boat hot enough to make everyone blow on the first bite. That balance can be surprisingly refreshing for visitors from places where traditional food is sometimes protected by rules, labels, etiquette, or centuries of expectation. America is perfectly capable of respecting tradition, but at the fair, it often asks a different question. Can this local ingredient become more fun without losing what makes it local? Fried cheese curds answer that question before anyone finishes chewing. They are rich, salty, crispy, proudly regional, and almost impossible to eat slowly. Nothing about them needs a luxury dining room, and that may be the entire point. At a state fair, great food does not need white tablecloths to prove where it came from. Sometimes Wisconsin just puts its dairy pride in a fryer and lets the crowd handle the rest. Dinner dressed as dessert. If somebody hands you a sundae at an American state fair, checking whether it contains ice cream is apparently a reasonable precaution. One of the cleverest examples is the hot beef sundae, a fairground creation that takes the visual language of dessert and fills it with mashed potatoes, roast beef, gravy, shredded cheese, and a cherry tomato sitting proudly on top like it has successfully infiltrated the dessert menu. What makes this food memorable is not simply the portion or the ingredients. The real attraction is the joke built into the presentation. A traditional British roast dinner is treated with a certain comfortable seriousness. Roast beef, potatoes, gravy, and vegetables arrive, spread across a proper plate. And Sunday lunch in Britain has long been a recognizable family ritual. Cross the Atlantic and enter an American state fair, however, and essentially the same family of flavors can suddenly turn up, stacked vertically in a plastic cup, looking like something ordered by a child who has been given temporary control of the kitchen. That playful transformation says a great deal about why state fair food feels so distinctly American. The hot beef sundae does not depend on some bizarre ingredient that nobody has heard of. Every component is familiar. Mashed potatoes become the ice cream. Gravy plays the role of chocolate sauce. Shredded cheese resembles sprinkles, and the tomato completes the disguise as the savory version of a cherry on top. The pleasure begins before the first bite, because the brain recognizes one thing while the nose is reporting something completely different. It is culinary mischief with gravy that matters in an environment where food is competing with livestock barns, giant pumpkins, midway rides, music, demonstrations, and several thousand other reasons to look somewhere else. Presentation becomes entertainment. A regular bowl of beef and potatoes might satisfy hunger, but arranging those same ingredients like an ice cream sundae gives people a reason to point at it, photograph it, send it to somebody back home and say, America has done something again. And people clearly enjoy showing up for that kind of experience. The Iowa State Fair drew a record 1,182 visitors in 2024, according to official fair attendance figures. When more than 1 million people move through one fairground in less than 2 weeks, food is doing more than feeding a crowd. It becomes part of the show, and vendors have every reason to make familiar ingredients visually impossible to ignore. This is where the contrast with many European food traditions becomes especially entertaining. In Lyon, Bologna, or Vienna, presentation can certainly be beautiful, but classic dishes often gain status by remaining recognizable to their history. At an American fair, familiarity is sometimes merely the starting point. The question becomes, how can we make grandma's comfort food look like it just won a dare? That willingness to play with tradition without disrespecting it is remarkably inviting. Nobody eating a hot beef sundae is being asked to abandon roast beef and potatoes. If anything, the dish celebrates how comforting those flavors already are. The only change is that America gives the meal a costume, sends it into a crowd, and lets everyone enjoy the joke together. There is something wonderfully confident about a food culture that does not require every beloved dish to behave itself. Some traditions are protected by silverware and etiquette. State fair traditions are often protected by the fact that people have too much fun eating them to let them disappear. A European visitor may recognize every ingredient immediately and still need several seconds to understand what is sitting in the cup. That small moment of confusion is exactly the point. America took a roast dinner, dressed it like dessert, and somehow made mashed potatoes feel like fairground entertainment. Pickles got ambitious. There are foods that improve when dressed up, and then there are fried pickles, which somehow become more addictive by doing the exact opposite of what common sense suggests. A cucumber starts out crisp and refreshing, spends time becoming salty and sour and brine, then gets coated in seasoned batter and dropped into hot oil until it comes out crunchy, tangy, hot, and completely uninterested in behaving like a vegetable anymore. That transformation is the whole appeal. Fried pickles have especially deep roots in the American South, and one of the best-known origin stories points to Atkins, Arkansas, where Burnell Fatman Austin began serving them in the early 1960s near the Atkins pickle plant. Over time, they moved from a regional curiosity into the wider world of Southern fairs, festivals, sports venues, and state fair food stands. What makes them interesting is that they were never designed to be elegant. They were designed to make a sharp, familiar flavor louder. That is a very different instinct from the way pickled foods are often treated across Europe. Germany has a long tradition of gherkins, particularly Spreewald pickles in Brandenburg, where the brine, herbs, and cucumber itself remain the center of attention. In Poland, ogórki kiszone are appreciated for fermentation, acidity, and crunch. Across parts of Scandinavia, pickled cucumbers usually work as a bright, acidic companion to richer foods rather than becoming the main event. America looks at that supporting actor and hands it the microphone. The addictive quality comes from contrast. The pickle inside is cold or warm depending on how quickly it is served, but it still carries moisture and acidity. The coating brings dry crunch, salt, and toasted flavor from frying. Then ranch dressing often enters the picture with fat, herbs, and coolness, softening the vinegar bite just enough to make the next piece seem like a very reasonable idea. The tongue gets sour, salty, fatty, crunchy, and creamy in rapid succession, which is probably why stopping after one feels less like discipline and more like leaving a movie halfway through. There is also something very state fair about taking an ingredient that usually sits quietly beside a sandwich and promoting it to headline status. At the Minnesota State Fair alone, food is such a major part of the experience that the fair regularly features hundreds of food and beverage options across its grounds. The event drew more than 2 million visitors in 2024, according to official attendance figures, which means vendors are competing inside a food environment where being merely good is not enough. A snack has to smell good from 10 feet away, survive being eaten while walking, and preferably give people a reason to tell somebody else about it before they have even finished the basket. Fried pickles do all three. They also reveal something appealing about American food culture at its most relaxed. Ordinary ingredients are allowed to have second lives. Nobody's pretending the pickle has become haute cuisine. Nobody needs a white tablecloth or a chef explaining the philosophy of dill. The humor comes from the fact that the food knows exactly what it is and still manages to become the item everybody keeps reaching for. That lack of pretension is part of the charm. A European visitor might come from a food culture where preservation techniques themselves carry generations of history, and America certainly respects its own traditions too. Yet the state fair adds another layer by asking whether a familiar food can become more social, more playful, and just a little harder to put down. In the case of the humble pickle, the answer arrives hot, battered, and usually beside a cup of ranch. Somewhere along the way, the side dish figured out it could be the reason people came back to the stand. Beer learned to crunch, a cold beer at a fair makes perfect sense. Beer sealed inside a fried pocket of dough requires a few more seconds for the brain to catch up, which is probably why deep-fried beer became one of those American fair foods people remember long after they have forgotten what ride they went on. The idea appeared at the State Fair of Texas in 2010 when inventor Mark Zabel entered deep-fried beer in the Big Tex Choice Awards and won Most Creative. His version used beer enclosed inside a pretzel-like dough pocket, then fried briefly enough to crisp the exterior without simply boiling away everything inside. The result sounded impossible on paper, which was precisely its advantage. At a fair, curiosity can be just as powerful as hunger. That is the interesting part worth digging into, because deep-fried beer reveals how American fairs have turned food into something closer to live entertainment. Germany already has one of the world's strongest beer cultures, and in Munich, the beer itself is usually the centerpiece. The ritual revolves around the brew, the stein, the hall, the food beside it, and the social experience around the table. Belgium goes even further in another direction, with hundreds of beer styles and a drinking culture that often pays close attention to glassware, fermentation, and serving tradition. Those are cultures built around appreciating beer for what it already is. Texas looked at beer and apparently wondered whether it could become finger food. That sounds like a joke, but economically it makes perfect sense inside a fairground. A vendor surrounded by dozens of competitors cannot rely only on being tasty. The product has to explain itself from 20 feet away, preferably in 4 words or less. Deep-fried beer does that before anyone even sees the booth. The name creates the sale. This matters at an event operating on an enormous scale. The State Fair of Texas reported more than 2.3 million visitors during its 2023 run. With crowds at large, the fair becomes a temporary marketplace where every concession stand is fighting for a tiny slice of attention. An ordinary snack may disappear into the background. Something that makes a person stop walking, turn around and say, "Wait, they fried what?" has already won half the battle. That little pause is the real product. The flavor may get somebody to finish the serving, but curiosity gets them into line. Then photography takes over. Somebody sends the picture to a group chat, somebody else insists on trying one, and suddenly a small dough pocket becomes a social event. American fair vendors understood this long before the term viral food became common online. If people enjoy telling the story of eating something, the story itself becomes part of what they paid for. There is also a wonderful lack of preciousness behind it. Beer does not lose its dignity because somebody put it inside fried dough for one afternoon. The classic version still exists 5 minutes away in a cup. State fair culture simply gives familiar things permission to have a ridiculous weekend. That attitude can feel refreshing to visitors from cities where food tradition often carries a long list of unwritten rules. In Brussels, nobody needs to reinvent a Trappist beer to make it meaningful. In Munich, a massive lager already arrives with generations of identity attached to it. America can appreciate that seriousness while still having a place where experimentation is allowed to run around without a chaperone. Deep-fried beer belongs to that place. The point was never to improve beer itself. The point was to create 5 minutes that people would still talk about after they left the fairgrounds. In Texas, apparently even happy hour can wear a crispy jacket. Casserole escaped the dish. Minnesota somehow looked at a casserole, one of the least portable foods ever created, and decided it should be eaten while walking through a state fair. That decision gave us hot dish on a stick, a wonderfully specific piece of Midwestern logic in which meatballs and tater tots are threaded onto a stick, dipped in corn dog style batter, fried, and served with mushroom gravy for dipping. The funniest part is that this food does not feel invented by a marketing department. It feels like somebody's church basement supper figured out how to sneak onto the midway. That is exactly why it works. Hot dish has a particular place in Minnesota culture. It usually describes a baked casserole built around meat, starch, vegetables, and a creamy binder, with tater tots becoming one of its most recognizable toppings. Outside the Midwest, people may simply call something similar a casserole. Inside Minnesota, the word carries the comfortable familiarity of family dinners, potlucks, community halls, and recipes that rarely require tweezers for plating. Putting that idea on a stick changes something deeper than the shape. European comfort food often stays closely tied to the table. Sweden has casseroles such as Janssens frestelse, built from potatoes, onions, cream and sprats, while Britain has cottage pie and shepherd's pie, both designed around the pleasure of sitting down to something hot, heavy, and reassuring. These dishes make sense with plates, forks, and enough time to remain in one place. Minnesota takes the emotional idea of that meal and makes it mobile. That matters at a fair where sitting down can feel like voluntarily stepping out of the action. The Minnesota State Fair runs for 12 days leading up to Labor Day and routinely draws around 2 million visitors, placing it among the largest state fairs in the country. When that many people are moving between livestock barns, concerts, exhibits, rides, and food stands, portability stops being a convenience and becomes part of the design. Hot dish on a stick solves that problem without throwing away the regional identity. The tater tot is still there. The meat is still there. Mushroom gravy still provides that familiar creamy richness. Yet the whole meal has been rebuilt around one hand, which leaves the other free for a lemonade, a map, a kid's hand, or whatever enormous stuffed animal somebody has just spent $40 trying to win. That is where the American fair becomes genuinely clever. It does not simply make food larger or stranger. At its best, it redesigns familiar regional dishes around the behavior of the people eating them. The fair understands that nobody wants to stop exploring just because lunch arrived. So, the plate disappears, the fork gets fired, and Grandma's casserole is suddenly ready for a 3-mile walk. There is also a cultural confidence in taking something deeply local and allowing it to become funny without turning it into a joke. Minnesotans are not embarrassed by hot dish because it lacks restaurant glamour. Quite the opposite. Putting it on a stick almost announces that comfort food does not need permission from fine dining to matter. That attitude can be especially refreshing for visitors from European cities, where traditional dishes often arrive with strong expectations about how they should look and how they should be served. In Stockholm, nobody expects Janssens frestelse to appear on a skewer beside a Ferris wheel. In Lyon, a gratin is unlikely to be redesigned so you can eat it while standing in line for a tractor demonstration. Minnesota sees no contradiction there. The dish can carry family memory and still have a sense of humor. It can taste familiar while looking completely new. Most importantly, it can belong so strongly to one place that eating it anywhere else would feel slightly wrong. That may be the secret behind the best state fair food. People are not simply buying lunch, they are tasting a region after it has loosened its tie. And Minnesota apparently decided even casserole deserved a day out. Pork chop royalty, there is something beautifully American about taking a pork chop, sticking it on a wooden handle, and deciding that plates have become optional. At a state fair, this is not treated as a gimmick or a novelty item designed for tourists. It is lunch, it is tradition, and it is the kind of food people will carry through a midway while watching livestock judging with one hand and checking raffle tickets with the other. That simplicity is exactly what makes the pork chop on a stick so addictive. European fair food often leans toward regional specialties that already have a long-established place outside the fair itself. In Germany, bratwurst and pretzels are just as comfortable at a Christmas market or neighborhood festival as they are at a major event. In Belgium, waffles do not need a carnival to justify their existence. In France, grilled sausages and regional cheeses already belong to everyday food culture. American state fairs, by contrast, have developed an entire category of food that feels almost inseparable from the fairground itself. You can technically make these things at home, but somehow they make more sense when there is a Ferris wheel behind you and somebody nearby is trying to win a stuffed bear the size of a refrigerator. The pork chop on a stick fits that world perfectly because it turns an ordinary cut of meat into portable fair equipment. Iowa is especially famous for this kind of pork culture, and that connection is not accidental. According to the USDA's 2022 Census of Agriculture, Iowa had more than 20 million hogs and pigs, far more than any other US state. Pork is not some decorative theme borrowed for the weekend. It is part of the agricultural economy that built entire communities across the Midwest. That changes the meaning of the food. A European visitor might initially see a giant grilled pork chop with a stick attached and assume Americans are simply making everything bigger again. Yet the more interesting point is that the portion, the format, and the setting all come from the same place. State fairs are built around movement. People walk for hours between barns, competitions, rides, demonstrations, and food stands. A meal that requires a knife, fork, and quiet table would almost feel like asking NASCAR to install parallel parking. The wooden handle solves the problem with almost suspicious efficiency. There is also a little bit of theater in the way the pork chop is served. It looks substantial without becoming fussy. The grill marks are visible, the bone gives it structure, and the entire thing has the visual confidence of food that knows nobody came to the fair looking for microgreens. It is filling, recognizable, and easy to eat while standing, which may explain why foods like this have remained popular while countless trendy fair creations disappear after one season. That is where American fair culture becomes easy to appreciate. The best foods are not necessarily the strangest ones. They are the ones that understand exactly where they are being eaten. A pork chop on a stick belongs beside tractor pulls, livestock barns, and crowded grandstands in a way that would feel completely different inside a polished restaurant in Paris or Copenhagen. The food and the place reinforce each other until separating them almost ruins the joke. America did not reinvent the pork chop. It simply gave it a handle and somewhere fun to go. Maybe that is the real charm of the American state fair. It takes ordinary things people grew up with, gives them room to become playful, oversized, messy, and unforgettable, then turns them into memories families keep returning to. From a butter cow to food that seems invented on a dare, the fun is never only about what is being served, it is about how America celebrates being itself. Which state fair tradition would you make a European try first? Tell us below, and subscribe for more.